Thank you, everybody, for the break amendment in Kitchissippi Ward, 300, 302, 304, and 306 Elm Grove Avenue. Now,
Can I hold this until?
hang on a minute. Before you guys get all set up, before anybody gets anything set up, even though it's after the witching hour of 12:45, Mr. Fickner, are you here, Mr. Fickner? Is it Fickner? Mr. Charles Fickner? Okay, I'll keep coming back and calling him. We're going to go to the next one then, which is, Linda Hode. Linda, are you back? Linda's always on time. Maybe she left. Yeah. Zoning bylaw amendment, 87 Sterling Avenue. Linda's not here. Olivia Gauthier. Okay, they might be together. And Brian Casagrande, are you back yet? No. Okay, we're batting nothing. So, 8900 Jean d'Arc Boulevard North. Dan Paquette, this is your lucky day. As long as Lise Dion Lever. Lise, are you here? Has she ever been here? Does anybody know what Lise looks like? Because she's in Councillor, it says here Cumberland, but actually it is Councillor Lulov's Orleans ward. Maybe. Okay. Are you Lise Dion? No? Okay. Sorry, Dan, you may not have got a lucky day. I'm going to, but because it's now 5 minutes after, I'm going to run through all the ones we have held, and then we'll go back to the beginning, okay? Next is 250 Besserer Street, and I know that we have people, but do we have everybody that wanted to speak? We have Daniel Rose. He's here. Janice Eliasov and Monique Deschamps. You're here. Who's Les Edu? Les Idas? That is a very different word. But it could be, if it was en français, it would be les, right? So, Carl Fernie.
Are we doing Besserer now?
Yeah, and I've got a motion on Besserer.
Yeah, I know, for council.
Yeah, Flurry's coming back for that.
And Kirk Mawini. Okay, we have kind of a problem. We're not going to be able to go ahead yet, even though we have some of the people. We don't have any of the applicant here. And it could be because they think they're going to be later in the game. So, again, I'm going to go through once.
I have a question.
The next item that is held is is 58 Florence Street. Is Paul Couvrette here? Okay. And Murray Chown isn't here. Oh, Murray is here. Hey, Murray. Okay, as always. Let's see, that one's withdrawn. That one's done. Term of council priorities, who held that?
Matt.
Oh, well, he's not here either, so.
Well, he told me to text him when his item came.
Okay, so you're texting, so we'll go back to him because Besserer will come first. Oh, Carl, here you come. There, well, you might get lucky. And then we're holding the draft operating and capital budget. Raymond Sullivan has submitted his comments and he had to leave. Christine Santal, are you here? Okay, how about Casey Hunley and Kulad Bey? Okay, you're here. Shelley, are you back? That's okay anyway. All right, okay, so I'm going to go back to the very first one that I called. And the first one that we're complete will do, okay? And then I'm only calling one more time. I think that is fair. That'll be 3 times.
My staff will run down to see if the delegation is in the captain.
Okay, perfect. Who, Mr. Fickner?
Mr. Fickner.
Okay, so are they going to text you from there? Rather
Charlie,
than...
He's on his way.
Okay. Okay, Brian Casagrande, are you back yet? Okay, but I think I'm going to go ahead with this one anyway. Is Linda Hode here? See,
So the next one is Sterling.
but Olivia Gauthier's here, right? All right. Okay, let's start with that one. That would be Ann O'Connor at 87 Sterling. Is Ann O'Connor here?
She's
Oh,
here.
yeah. Oh, Brian. We're starting on 87 Sterling. And for everybody in the audience, when I say a time, I value your time. I set my alarm. So really, now we're almost 10 minutes past the time, so I'll be calling one more time, but then we'll be done. So, Linda Hode is not here, but maybe is on her way. Olivia Gauthier, come on forward. This is 87 Sterling Avenue. It's a zoning bylaw amendment. Olivia, are you in support?
Yeah, she's with the applicant.
Yes, she's with me.
Okay, so I guess the question is, because Ms. Hode was going to speak in support.
No, I think she probably wanted to know.
Oh, I
On
thought
87 Sterling? No,
thought she said she was, oh.
they've got serious issues.
Okay.
So, Jen, you had said when you let people go for lunch that we were going to come back at 1:30.
Yeah, but we clarified that before people left.
People left, and then the clarification of the clock.
We're not waiting till 1:30.
No, but that's why it's.
Yeah, okay. But you had somebody sitting there. So we can't start yet because Linda Hode may want to speak. She did want to speak. Do you have a phone number for her or anything?
She doesn't say. She's not in the cafeteria.
Don't you think she would be in the cafeteria? She might be at the craft sale.
I am happy to raise the
Okay. Where is she? Okay, she's coming through the thing.
So we'll stand up.
Yeah, stand down and have Linda speak. Why did I think she was speaking in favor? Because her comments seem to be positive. Yeah. Where did she go? Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Somebody tell her that we need her in here. You're up first, Linda. This is to permit a 3-story low-rise apartment dwelling with 7 dwelling units, just for those people who are not. Okay.
Thank you. Fortunately, I don't have a lot to say. You'll be glad to know. But I've waited a long time to say it. You did receive a submission from me, and I would just like to emphasize a couple of the things that I mentioned. I guess the first thing is actually a very good idea that the applicant had, and that is to provide a visitor parking space near the front of the building, which would also serve for loading and unloading for people who come to do, Bell and all the rest of them, or Uber, or people who are delivering parcels, because that's been an issue on our narrow one-way streets. If people come and there is no place for them to park off the street, they can be blocking the road. The other thing I would like to mention to you is bicycle parking. We appreciate that there's more than one bicycle parking space per unit, more than the city requires. However, we would like to suggest to you that as you progress with your rezonings, official plans, you make the bicycle parking requirement much higher in areas where no vehicle parking is to be provided, which is now a considerable portion of the city, and that you set a standard for indoor bicycle parking. Many people who use their bicycle as their primary means of transportation do bicycle all year round, or as much as possible of the year, and indoor parking is much appreciated by people who do this. The facades, that's the biggest issue. I sent you a picture of the building as it now exists, and we have asked on a couple of occasions that the brick be retained as opposed to being covered up with the more modern materials. Modern materials on the top can be blended quite nicely with existing brick in our experience. And I guess the other thing I would like to say is to thank the staff and the developer for making the improvements they did do to the original facade of this building. You must have seen in the report what, well, we've got it up there. It was originally all black, and the front porches were, or front balconies were pretty iffy. So there have been improvements, and we do appreciate that. But I guess the last thing I want to say is the addition of the low-rise apartments through the R4 zoning review to neighborhoods such as Hintonburg will meet considerable resistance if higher quality compatible designs are not required. It's very important when you are facing something as large as this, and you can't see from these plans the context in which it sits, but you can from the photo I provided see what's next door. The other side is similar. You really do have to make extra effort to make these bigger buildings fit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper?
Thank you. So the Hintonburg Community Association's comments have moved from being strongly opposed to thanking staff for some improvements. Is the HCA still opposed to this development?
No, we're not opposed because we don't have many grounds to oppose, other than the possible non-compatibility, and I understand that can be dealt with in more detail at the site plan phase.
And you have my commitment to using whatever leverage we can get to try to retain some of those facades. One of the things I did want to highlight is your earlier comments this summer after our open house. The HCA noted, "It is unfortunate that the applicant chose to proceed with retention of the existing structure and construction of the addition prior to approval of this application. These actions preempt or render more difficult the resolution of several of the issues below." And one of those issues is that there are 7 units. It makes it really difficult when they began building a building for 7 units before they had the zoning approval. Do you want to provide any further color, or?
I guess it was just that we do encourage developers to come to our zoning committee where we invite neighbors to discuss their projects. And what can happen if we do this, we're offered an opportunity, and the developers offered the opportunity to exchange ideas, and for us to say, oh, that isn't going to fly here, we're going to oppose it, or we suggest that you try this. You might achieve the same thing by, flipping. So often, flipping the building can make a big difference as to how it fits into the neighborhood. So it's very unfortunate when people try to skirt around the rules and don't approach the association and discuss what they're proposing to do. Because we've had, as you well know, we've had very many successful developments, and you haven't seen me here very often.
No, it has.
No, it's been a quiet term.
Well, that's because
When it comes to Hindenburg.
that's because people are working with us.
Yeah.
Well, that's because I think you have the counselor
Well,
you
that
have.
helps too.
And, you also have the history that you have.
Sorry?
You personally have the history that you have, Linda.
Well,
Your
our
commitment,
association
I
has a
think.
history of working with developers. I mean, we
Yeah.
don't oppose everything. We understand, or we think we understand, the zoning bylaw. And people, neighbors often do get all upset about no parking height. And we have to explain, it's the zoning bylaw. We can't fight that. What we have to do is work on how we can make it work better for us. Got to be reasonable.
But, I mean, if this had been a demolition, instead of sort of jerry-rigging a 7-unit building onto something that was pre-existing and working with the building permit system, et cetera, had this building been built as a custom building for 7 units, it would have had more bicycle parking, it would have had more amenity space, the units would be better laid out for larger households, perhaps. Yeah.
We'd hope so. And actually, the side yard setbacks, they've benefited to a great extent by the existing non-conforming rights of the existing building, and they've extended them prior to getting permission, I guess, or they extended them as of right to a certain extent. But had they applied for the 7-unit apartment building, I think there would have been more pushback in terms of some of those the side yards, the things that impact the neighbors.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Okay, so Olivia, Gauthier, and Brian Casagrande.
Madam Chair, I'm going to allow Bria and Eric, who's working on the file, to respond to comments with Olivia.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you to say your name when you get up here to a mic. Can you move over one? You have it? Bria, nice name.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Bria Aird. I'm a planner at FO10 Planning and Design, and I've been working with Brian Casagrande on this project. Also with me is Olivia Gauthier, who is the project designer and is representing 2B. So in light of the limited comments, I'm just going to respond primarily to the facade, the materiality concerns, and the existing building, and Olivia can speak to the process. So as Linda Hode noted, there were some comments on the initial design in terms of materiality, in terms of balconies, and there were changes to that to address some of those community concerns. The third floor balcony was dropped to address concerns about overlook. There is a desire to retain the brick facade on the first floor, and we're certainly willing to work through those issues with the community and with staff through the end of the site plan control process. And the materiality on the side yard where there is higher visibility from the street has also been addressed. So I think there is some room to continue to work on those issues through site plan, and we're certainly willing to work with the community on that front. The other thing I do want to note is that this a significant number of the relief that we're seeking is due to the fact that the existing building is retained, and that does have implications in terms of the affordability of construction. So that is a decision that I think makes sense in the context of this development. I think those are the direct issues I wanted to speak to, and I think Olivia will just address the larger process questions.
So in terms of process, 2B development largely focuses on...
Could you speak closer into the mic, please?
So for the process, 2B development really focuses more on rejuvenating older buildings instead of just knocking them down and trying to build all brand new. So in this case, we wanted to maintain some of the character of that house, which is why we did work with the community to keep the existing brick, to reduce some of the privacy overlooks. We do understand that some of the process which we had taken wasn't exactly what the community wanted, and that's largely due to us being new, upcoming, and working with converting older homes into these new low-rise developments. But we think that, working with the community this way and having the numerous meetings, we can work together and make it a very successful project.
So just to add, Madam Chair, just to add to what Olivia has said, again, 2B is a new firm, and at the time took this two-stage process. It seemed it's legal, and it seemed to them to just have advantages in terms of construction, and then we've since had meetings with 2B as FO10 and also with the councillor, where we've looked at the process and made them aware of the constraints of this process, and I think they're committed to continuing to work with the community and the councillor in a more open way moving forward. So.
Okay, thank you very much. No questions? Thank you. Okay, so on the report on 87th Street. Okay, so Councillor Dudas, you have a question for staff.
So I was just curious, so that did provide some insight into why...
Bri, they're asking staff, so
Yeah,
thank you for coming out today.
Thank you very much. That did provide a little bit of clarification as to why the process wasn't followed appropriately. But I'm a big fan of process. Planning dictates process, and it requires it. And that's why many of us make our decisions based on developers and groups and individuals following process. So I would just like to get your thoughts on what do you think was maybe misleading, but what do you think was the intent of the owner in doing this? Was it to circumvent our processes and ultimately get what they wanted? Or was this something that we should disregard this one time only? Like, I'm really stuck on this one because, once again, we're supposed to be having this strong partnership with the communities and in conversation, and this doesn't seem to be a good example of that.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, the process that they followed, while discouraged by planning services, is permitted through the Planning Act. So just to break down, to be more clear about what the approach that was taken, they applied for a building permit for an extension to the existing duplex without letting building code know that they plan to convert it into a low-rise apartment building. The permit was issued. Within a few weeks, they applied for a minor rezoning and a site plan control application. I flagged it through my own research when I received the application that a permit had been recently issued for a different use. But at that point, the permit had been issued. It was fully legal, their approach, but it was discouraged by our department. We flagged that for them immediately. And it's very hard for me to speculate about their intentions. I don't feel comfortable doing that. But
Maybe
that's
I
the
can
position
ask-
that we are in, I guess.
So maybe I can ask, has this particular company ever done that before, or is this the first time they've done that? That, to your best of your knowledge?
To the best, Madam Chair, to the best of our knowledge, we're just unaware if they've done this before. I can't think of any off the top of my head, to tell you the truth. But, it doesn't mean they haven't, but I'm just not aware of it.
Is there a way for you as staff to ensure they do not do this again?
I think we're really, really, really out of order here now. Okay?
I withdraw.
I could try to answer that, Madam Chair. It's
Sure.
just that as Ms. O'Connor's...
Actually, I prefer that you didn't.
Oh, fair enough.
No, because I mean, we're getting into personalities, and that's what they said that they don't remember and that sort of thing. And I understand why you're bringing this up, because we hear that sometimes from other applications. But I think that we just stick with what this one is today.
Okay, certainly.
If you don't mind.
No, that's fine.
Maybe
Thank
have
you.
that conversation definitely offside with Mr. James, who does a lot of work in that community, and Councillor Leeper, who does a lot of work in that community as well. Okay. Anything else? Okay. On 87 Sterling, is that carried? Carried. Dissent? Carried? Thank you. No, it's carried. All right, we're going to go back to number 5 because Mr. Fickner is back here, I think, now. So come forward. Did you come back? I thought he saw him. Charles Fickner? Yes. After that, if I try to find out, we would be on, Dan Paquette is here on the 8900 Jeanne d'Arc. And while Mr. Fickner is getting set up, I'm just going to ask the question, is Lise Dion-Levert here? Lise Dion-Levert on Jeanne d'Arc Boulevard. Okay, so we'll do this one first, which is, I got to find the numbers though. 300, 302, 304, yeah, 306. Councillor Hughley. Mr. Hughley, when are you leaving? When do you have to leave? 2:30. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so this item is the zoning bylaw amendment on Elm Grove Avenue to permit 4 low-rise apartments with 4 dwelling units each. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I wish to speak to 3 points. Life fire safety issues, responsibilities, and potential liabilities. This development in an R4 zone was originally approved at being 4 triplex units. The frontage of each of the lots was reduced from 12 meters to 9 meters, and the intent was always to turn them into apartment buildings with 4 units, but the application was made for 3. Now that they're coming back, they've built it, it's largely completed, and they're now asking for the variance to change the side yard setback from 1.2 meters, which is allowed for a triplex, to 1.5, which is required for the apartment. So it's an after-the-fact application, and it seems that the plans were approved, allowing this to happen. The issues particularly that I want to focus on are the driveway and the side yard setback. If we look at this, we have the street at the top, the two driveways between two pairs of triplexes, and a parking space in the rear. Oh, come on, work here. How can I make this? Why is this not working?
You want to go forward? You can push that button maybe like this if you want to go forward or something.
That brings it down? Okay. So again, there's another one of the sketches. And the issue arises particularly with respect to the fact that each of those apartment buildings has 3 doors exiting directly onto the driveway. And that raises a concern for safety, in that if we have a very long, narrow driveway, and if there's, for example, a child having a dispute with parents and decides to leave the house fast, the chance of having an accident with a vehicle going through the laneway is considerable. If there's a domestic dispute or a handicapped person and someone is coming out of the building, again, the risk of accident is non-trivial. There's just another drawing showing the fact that there are, in each of the 2 driveways, 3 doors. In the Building Code Act, there is a specification of the role of various persons. There is a role for the designer, there is a role for the builder. It's specified, each has to play their role in ensuring compliance with all of the requirements of the Building Code Act. And there is a problem with this, though, and it was reflected in a decision of the Supreme Court in the year 2000, and that is that, as the Supreme Court said in its decision, it was a challenge against the City of Toronto, contractors in the normal course of events will fail to observe certain aspects, and that's why municipalities hire building inspectors to inspect the plans, verify compliance, and to inspect the building as it's being constructed. It notes as well the requirement is to ensure that all developments meet the requirements of the bylaws. And it's, as the court said, the inspector must ensure compliance. Oh, gee, sorry, how do I go this way? There are a few other comments made in the Supreme Court, but it clearly points out that these municipalities have clear responsibilities to ensure health and safety. And that was essentially the subject of the discussion. So, recognizing the municipality has a role, there are specific roles identified for the chief building official in the municipality, and there are roles specified as well for the building inspectors. And all of these are and inspection, incidentally, is inspection at 2 stages. One is plans approval, and the second is approval of the building as actually being constructed. In issuing a permit, part of this process is that the building officials at the city have to ensure that a permit is issued unless the building will contravene the Act, the building code, or any other applicable law. And the Act defines applicable law as including the zoning bylaws. So there is a legal obligation to ensure that is done, and that is put on the city staff. There's also a prohibition against building any building in any way that deviates from the approved plans. So if one wants to deviate from the approved plans, you must get prior approval of those revisions.
That's your time, sir.
Pardon?
That's your time. Question from Councillor Leeper.
So, Mr. Fickner, I think you mentioned the requirement for adherence to the zoning bylaw. In this instance, do you feel that there was a deviation from the zoning bylaw?
Yes, Councillor, there is. If I can, I'll flip down, and because I think it's important to see what the zoning bylaw says. I will, on the way by, just note that specifically under the Act, the responsibility for ensuring compliance is assigned to City Council. It's not assigned to city staff. And within the provisions of the Municipal Act itself, it says that the job of council is to represent the public and only to consider the interests of the municipality, and that the council must ensure that the administrative and control processes, policies, practices, and procedures ensure that the intent is met. But if I get specifically now...
Yeah, so the role of council is probably less important here than in terms of approving this building. Do you feel there was a deviation?
But that's what council is. So it's your role to ensure compliance. Now, within the zoning bylaw, there is a provision, section 101A, which says that parking spaces and all driveways leading to those spaces must be set aside and used exclusively for that purpose. In other words, if you read that wording strictly, what you see is you cannot use a driveway as a pedestrian path to access doors. And if one complies with that, the concern that I raised about accidents happening and the city becoming liable is eliminated. In the zoning bylaw itself, there is also an interpretation section which leaves no doubt that the bylaw is written in plain language. The words are clear, the words are simple, and if the words must have their ordinary meaning, and the most restrictive provisions must be applied. So the words have to be the words have to be interpreted as they say. So if it says the driveway must be used exclusively for the purpose of driving to the parking spaces, then that precludes using it for a pedestrian path. And if an accident were to happen, which inevitably some will, because more and more of these buildings with doors onto very narrow driveways are being approved, then there's a question of will an injured party then sue the city for having allowed a building to be built that so clearly appears to have violated the explicit wording in the zoning bylaw that the driveways leading to parking spaces must be used exclusively for that purpose.
Okay. Thank you, Charles. So I'll ask staff for a reply to that when we have a chance.
In writing?
I'll ask staff about there are two assertions that have been made with respect to whether or not those doors give rise to a legal liability.
Thank you, Mr. Fichtner. He's now asking questions of staff.
Is that of me, Jeff? Or?
No, this is of staff. Thank you very much for your delegation.
I'm sorry I was not able to raise the second issue, which is the side yard setback issue.
Yeah, okay, good try. Thank you very much.
Can I do that?
No, you can't.
Okay.
If he'd known about it, he probably would have asked you, but he's addressing the one you did say.
I think,
which you didn't get to say in the time, so.
To Mr. Fichtner's point, I think there is a question as well of when the builders build, they dig, and the measurement to the wall doesn't include a few centimeters worth of cladding on the building, which if I can speak for Mr. Fichtner for a second. So the setback is actually, the developer needs a slightly bigger setback than they were granted by the Committee of Adjustment, because that setback doesn't account for several inches of construction on top of the wall. So I can ask staff about that as well.
If I could then comment on that.
No, you can't, sir.
I'll raise it and I'll ask staff about it. Unless you're able to do it like extremely quickly. In 30 seconds.
I can do it quickly.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We're into questions of staff. You've asked questions, 2 questions now, right?
Well, he asked one question.
No, thank you, sir. Okay. Thank you.
So with respect to the doors, do those give rise to liability on the part of the city? And with respect to driveways, does exclusively mean that they have to be used exclusively for driving on and nothing else? And then with respect to the setbacks, do setbacks need to be measured to the wall or to the construction? And what is the impact of that for this development?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not a lawyer, so I will not speak to the liability aspect, but I can tell you that the driveway provision has been reviewed with zoning staff, our zoning interpretations unit, and legal, and we are confident that this development does comply with that provision. On the side yard setback, from how you would measure that, it would be the closest point of the wall to the side lot line of where that measurement would be in terms of a compliance where there's a minimum setback required. It would be measured from the outside of the exterior wall.
Satisfy the question?
It does. I can wrap it up really quickly.
Well, no, we actually have somebody else to
Oh, we have
speak.
further delegation.
Well, we have Murray Chown's here. Did you want to speak, Murray?
Madam Chair, I understood that there was a motion for this item.
Come on. Yeah, we've lost our vice chair, so we have our backup vice chair. Yeah. Our Built Heritage chair. The assistant to the vice chair. So why don't you put that motion on the technical amendment on the floor?
Okay. Whereas the report, zoning bylaw amendment for 300, 302, 304, and 306 Elm Grove Avenue recommends reducing the required interior side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 1.2 meters. And whereas during the construction process and surveying method, the use of cladding on the side of the building accounts for a minimal amount of construction tolerance, and whereas the cladding on the side walls may extend slightly closer than the proposed 1.2 meters. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that the recommended interior side yard setback be a minimum of 1.1 meters to avoid a side yard zoning deficiency, and that Document 2, details of the recommended zoning, be amended to change the minimum interior side yard setback from 1.2 meters to 1.1 meters, and that pursuant to the Planning Act subsection 34:17, no further notice be given.
Been a long, long day, and I've got yet another item after this one, so I'm simply going to state that I fully support the staff recommendation. I fully support the motion that's before you. It's just, it will keep things clean, and unless there's any questions from members of committee, I would ask you to approve the staff recommendations as amended. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So over back to Councillor Leeper for the technical amendment. You wanted to comment on that, I thought you said?
I can comment on that, but just wrap it up.
Okay, so you can wrap it up. Anyone have any other questions? Any questions at all of Murray Chown? No? Thanks, Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else will have wrap up besides Councillor Leeper? All right, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you. And I think the issue of how they measure and the fact that in many cases they are probably out of compliance with the variance because the measurements that surveyors are taking are not taking into account several inches of construction on top of the wall is something that we need to work with staff and communities to make sure that we don't have hundreds of buildings that are out of compliance and make sure we're on top of that. I think you've probably seen my comments in the report. Mr. Fichtner asserted that the developer went to the Committee of Adjustment seeking approval for a triplex, and now they're seeking the zoning permission for a fourth. I do want to emphasize that when Mr. Chown and the developer came to the community meeting to familiarize the community with this, he set it on the table. I'm going to the Committee of Adjustment, I'm going to ask for the variances necessary to build a triplex, but then I will be coming back to City Council asking for the fourth unit. When he went to the Committee of Adjustment, he told the Committee of Adjustment, I am seeking the variances necessary to build a triplex, but be aware that if I'm granted that, I'm going to then go to City Council and ask for the zoning permission to put in the fourth unit. I have gotten some good support around the committee table for trying to push back at developers who are seeking after the fact fourth units for buildings where they've always intended to have them. In this instance, I'm going to be supporting the applicant because they were transparent up front. And I hope that that is going to be the model for these triplex to fourplex conversions moving forward, because something that the community really, really hates is a developer who is not upfront. In this instance, the developer has been upfront. So I'm going to be supporting the application.
Perfect, and you've been really clear consistently on that, so thank you very much. I think that's where Councillor Dudas was going earlier, too. So thank you. So on the technical amendment, carried, and on the item as amended, carried. Thank you. So now we're going to 8900 Jean d'Arc Boulevard North. Is Lise Dion-Lever here? Lise, come on up, Lise, here, please. And it says that it's in Cumberland Ward, but it's actually in Orleans Ward. So, Lise, you have 5 minutes.
Yes.
Welcome. Thanks for coming back.
Madam Chair, I am very pleased to have a chance to meet you and the councillors present, the committee. My name is Lise Dion-Lever. I'm an owner in Tower 2 of the Brigel construction. I think last week some of you were at our place for a party to celebrate the new launch of the future towers of the Brigel construction that will amount to 5. Now, my presence here today is to present you my concerns over the fact that there were some meetings before to discuss future development with Brigel. However, we were never made aware of these meetings by Brigel because we hadn't moved in yet to the towers. We don't have a condo board yet because we're just going to become owners of our own building. So as a community, we have not been consulted, and we're very worried about the future steps that Brigel wants to take with our community because of the plans to have access to the other towers that they will build through our own tower. And if you would consider this, you have just bought a house and you find out in a few weeks after you've moved in that the builder will be putting holes in your basement so that the other tenants of the other buildings will be able to have access to their house or their residences. So this is very scary as a concept because the building is built, and in the report that you have filed on page 28 and 29 considering this project, there's mention that there would be access, but it doesn't say how the people will have access to the future towers. And we just found out that it was by drilling holes in our basement home, in our parking lots, and there might even be 2 holes drilled to let access to towers 3 and 4 through our building. So this being said, what I would be asking of you is that you hold another open house as you have held in February of this year before we had moved in. And do this now that we have, as of tonight, we will be electing our own condo board, and we will have access to all the owners and tenants in our building, which we didn't before. We didn't have access to the list because we didn't have a board yet. And we would like to have the chance to speak with the committees, the planning committee and Brigel together to be very informed of how this issue will be dealt with, the holes in our building, who is going to maintain the passageways that will be created through our own building to lead to the other buildings, the fees access to that, the security, the actual, how people will, in one report it says that we will be issued fobs for our building, but nothing has been written, nothing has been, there has not been any precision on those items. So we're very concerned. And the fact also that in the report it says no trees will be cut down, nothing will be changed from the nature facing the river. Just this week, trees were being cut down. There's all kinds of stuff here that is a concern to the owners. So is there some chance that you would reconsider and let us know what will happen to our building? I'm trying to speak. I still had a minute. So I think if you had any recommendations, because we haven't been told anything.
Well, okay, so I'm going to ask Shoma comment on, was there no outreach? Was there no information that was shared?
When Tower 2 site plan zoning amendment as well as site plan approval were being considered before the city, it did include underground parking layouts that did indicate that the future access point for the underground parking for the future tower, that being Tower 3, would be through the underground parking layout of Tower 2. They would be sharing the same access ramp for both Towers 2 and 3. Therefore, the approved plans for Tower 2 did
When was that?
That was in 2016.
Did you live there in 2016? No.
Correct. So when the site plan was approved, the zoning was approved, we did not have any information regarding who the future owners for Tower 2 unit holders would be. But there are large signs posted on site for anyone who was interested in getting in touch with the city to see what the city had as informative information.
May I?
No.
No?
Just like Mr. Fickner couldn't come back, that's just not the way the rules go. Okay. Does anyone have any questions of Ms. Dion-Levert? No. Thank you very much for coming out. Does anyone have any questions on this item? We have also, Dan Paquette. Dan, you want to come up? Answer questions or speak to it as far as the... Yeah, so, we heard this morning with I mentioned that I've had people overnight say that they weren't aware of the 2006 agreement for the Barrhaven area. Of course not. We've got people moving in all the time, right? And so there is that element. Dan, do you want to comment on any outreach that was happened or anything or on this application?
Okay, sorry. Again, the name is Dan Paquette. I'm the planning consultant on this file. The project started in 2007 when we got our first approval for the first tower. And then for this particular application, there's been considerable consultation. There's been 2 meetings before the Urban Design Review Panel. There was a public meeting held in the community.
Are those open to the public?
Yes, they are.
And are the public could know about those?
Well, they're certainly open to the public.
Thank you.
And then there was an open house in the community held this year in the winter, and we had a pretty good turnout for it. And we also, of course, had this process here, which started in August of 2018. And so you've got signage on the property indicating that there's a zoning application. You've got the Planning Act approved notices that the staff are responsible for. And you have this public meeting today. So you, I think, have the opportunity to receive comments. I think we did a pretty good job because at the open house this winter, we must have had about 100 folks show up, I think. It was a pretty crowded room. And today I'm happy to see that there's fewer people with concerns on this project. I empathize with the observations. Certainly the way it works is that you're selling units at the same time. So we had approval for Tower 2 and those units were sold. But in terms of the garage aspect, the Tower 2 and Tower 3 share an access. And it was always contemplated that they'd have the same ramp. And that's to speak to the technical point I thought I heard. I'm here today with, we have the architect with us. We have the transportation consultant with us today. happy to bring them forward to answer any specific questions you might have as it relates to those disciplines and, of course, planning, which I represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you go on, question, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I should have asked that at the last presentation, but now that you're at the table, maybe you can answer this or staff will jump in. The lady mentioned about trees being cut down, that there wasn't supposed to be any trees being cut. Is there information on that? Are you cutting trees?
I can only speak to there is there is an area, a clear buffer, an absolute line that we can't touch. And that was approved in the last site plan. We're all aware of that line. There is no cutting going on in that buffer, and that's my understanding. Any cutting that has occurred is within the area that's been permitted to allow for the development of the property.
And staff can confirm that there are tree permits out there, or there are not?
I can confirm that there is an approved tree conservation report and landscape plan, as well as an EIS that was conducted. Both of those delineate the areas where tree cutting can occur and cannot occur. And the buffer that leads towards the river, there's a portion for which they need to seek tree permits with the city foresters, and that has been approved.
And is it being monitored?
Yes, it is being monitored.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Moffat?
Thanks. Just based on the comments from the previous speaker, just in terms of not, they're new, they're just developing their condo board tonight, apparently. Would the applicant and possibly working with the councillor's office be willing to reach out to them and set up a meeting in the short term so that they can have an opportunity, since they're new to the area, that they could have an opportunity to meet with Brigitte and the councillor and even possibly staff to go through the application, understand more of it, and ask the questions that they have?
If I may, through you, Madam Chair, certainly today, if we get approval, is for zoning. So there's still another process that we need to go through, and thus the opportunity to have a conversation with the residents of Tower 2, or at least seek additional input. The site plan has not been approved yet. So there is a chance for input that way. We would like to walk and chew gum at the same time here, seek approval today, get approval today, hopefully, so we can get going with the left hand, while the right hand secures the site plan approval, which we don't have yet.
Yeah, sure. No, I was just saying it'd be wise for the applicant to reach out to the new condo board and start that conversation sooner rather than later.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Okay, thanks, Dan. Thanks for coming out twice. Anyone have anything for wrap-up or whatever? All right, so on the, hang on a minute until I get the exact, on the 8900 Jean d'Arc Boulevard North in Orleans Ward, is item carried? Thank you. Next up is 250 Besserer Street.
I've been sitting here the whole time.
Yeah, like, don't act like you've been tortured or anything, okay? All you had to do was walk back and forth from your office. Yeah. Yeah, go for a run, eat some vegetables, stuff like that. We do have a motion. We do have a motion that you have that Councillor Leeper is going to move for you. Do you want to introduce that right off the bat? And then we'll go right to delegates.
So, Madam Chair, just for how I would plan, I'll address the motion in 1 second. I have questions to staff that I want to raise as part of zoning after, and I do have, for the record, some site plan components that I plan to, that I want to just present publicly. The motion is
You want to present them publicly today, but understanding they're for site plan?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for record. So Councillor Leeper, as a member of the committee, will be moving a motion on my behalf as it relates to the applicant's proposal for internal visitor parking. their request to waiver the parking, which I will address in my comments later, they are providing visitor parking, and of that, I believe that in an environment where you have close to 200 different units, you might need car sharing at some point, so that one of the spots be dedicated to car sharing. I did speak to the applicant. They're open to that, and I believe they'll be speaking. They are uncomfortable to confirm it in perpetuity, but are comfortable in piloting it and bringing it on site, and if it works, they plan to keep it. So we've worked on a motion that brings it forward, assigns the space, and that we can work through site plans to confirm its status. So I believe the applicant will be asking for a small change of one word in the motion, which, if they concur that we will address the component of it through site plan, I'm comfortable with.
So that would be for a temporary use? Because just like any business, I can't force Stonebridge, for example, to keep operating a golf course business. I can't, businesses have their own rules under the Business Act of Ontario.
In legal terms, it's just to make sure they're continue to be compliant with the zoning regulations. So
as long as the zoning doesn't define the one spot for just that purpose.
Exactly. That's exactly the point.
And if it doesn't, then we'll, that's fair ball. Are you going to read it? You want to read?
Yeah. So I'll just very quickly, whereas the report recommends reducing the required resident vehicular parking from 44 to 0, and whereas residents may occasionally need access to a vehicle, and whereas the provision of car sharing spaces would provide an additional transportation mode option to the future occupants of the proposed development, therefore be it resolved, the Planning Committee recommend that Council add the following provisions to Document 2, details of the recommended zoning. Under 2A, one visitor parking shall be used as a car sharing space. The use of the visitor parking space for car sharing purposes does not result in a zoning violation for a lack of visitor parking, and be it further resolved that pursuant to the Planning Act, subsection 3417, no further notice be given.
Mr. Gauthier or Mr. James, do you have any comments on this motion as it's been modified?
Yeah, if the word shall is modified by the word may.
Pardon, Steve?
If simply the word shall is modified by the word may, it keeps the option of maintaining all the visitor parking space or having a car shared.
It doesn't prohibit the use of a car share business.
Exactly.
And it allows the flexibility. Any comments on that from a legal perspective, Mr. Mark?
Madam Chair, the wording of the motion as I have it, I only see the word shall, I don't see the word may, and I do have some concerns about that. The wording of the motion as I have it, requires that a visitor parking place.
Mr. Mark's correct. Maybe I didn't express myself well. I wrote this motion, spoke to the applicant, who said to facilitate the process, we are comfortable with the motion if you change to may, which I'm comfortable if we plan to put it in the resolution for site plan.
Okay, so Mr. Mark went like this. That's the first time I've ever seen him do that. Our committee coordinator will find a way to put that into the minutes. Maybe a selfie or something like that. A Tim Mark selfie, just imagine. Be awesome. Listen, I'm going to bring up our delegations, okay? First of all is Denny LaRose. Denny, and you're going to speak in français. Where are you? There you are. And we have translation, everybody. And following Denny is Janice Eliasov and Monique Deschênes from the condominium board at 260 Bezra. So, sir, see that first seat? That's where you should have a seat. Bienvenue.
Merci.
To 5 minutes.
Distingués conseillers municipaux, mon nom est Denis Larose, je suis originaire d'Ottawa, je suis cardiologue. et j'ai pratiqué à Ottawa et à Hull avant de prendre ma retraite au 260 rue Besserer, à un coin de rue de la maison où mes grands-parents, la Rose, vivaient. Et il y a beaucoup de la Rose à Ottawa parce que ils avaient 6 filles, ils ont tous marié des Irlandais, puis il y en a à Barrhaven, il y en a à Kanata, il y en a à Orléans. Donc ma famille semble avoir des noms anglais, mais souvent ce sont des francophones. Liette Barclay, ma tante de 93 ans, s'appelle Liette Larose. Bon, juste pour dire que je viens de la Côte-de-Sable et on parlait français. Je ne suis pas un urbaniste, mais je suis un cardiologue et je trouve que la construction d'un immeuble au 250 Besserer de 10 étages ou 29 mètres et demi vient complètement perturber l'ambiance non seulement de notre rue Besserer, mais de toute la communauté de la Côte-de-Sable. Construire un immeuble de 99 petits appartements entre 2 maisons patrimoniales, situées au nord et au sud. Celle située au sud, c'est la maison de M. Louis Théodore Besserer, construite en 1844. Et cette propriété est non seulement patrimoniale, elle est reconnue par l'Ontario comme étant de valeur archéologique, construite en 1844, et elle est très belle. Moi, j'ai pris une photo de cette maison il y a 10 ans, et vous êtes bienvenus à venir la voir, si vous pouvez voir. Mais c'est juste que je ne suis pas ici pour défendre des règlements, mais je suis pour défendre une qualité de vie que l'on a en ce moment. On peut marcher nos chiens dans la Côte-de-Sable, on peut respirer l'air, profiter des arbres, des trottoirs. D'ailleurs, moi, je trouve que notre ville est très bien gérée. On a une piscine, le bain Champagne, pas loin, qui est extraordinaire. Donc, je ne veux pas dépasser mon temps, là, comme il me reste de temps. Il faut aussi noter que M. Besserer a donné le terrain à l'Université d'Ottawa. Et grâce à lui, qu'on a une université de qualité internationale en plein centre-ville. Donc, je vous invite à ne pas permettre une construction d'un monument. On ne veut pas avoir une tour Eiffel dans notre cour. Et puis, il y a eu un article dans Le Droit, et d'ailleurs, M. Julien Paquette lui-même ici a fait un article en français dans Le Droit, et il a cité l'historien de l'Université d'Ottawa pour dire que la construction d'un tel immeuble va nuire à la beauté de la Côte-de-Sable. Parce que M. Besserer a construit sa maison en haut de la Côte-de-Sable. Et là, on va aller planter devant un immeuble tout à fait cacophonique. On dit c'est pas harmonieux. Donc, ce qui nous préoccupe aussi beaucoup, c'est que vous abolissez 25 stationnements qu'il y a actuellement et vous allez construire un immeuble qui devrait avoir 44 stationnements. Donc, dans le fond, vous supprimez 75 stationnements. Et où les 99 résidents de cette tour vont-ils stationner? Leurs familles, leurs amis. Et il y a beaucoup de monde du Ottawa Little Theatre qui stationne sur notre rue, du cinéma Bytown, des gens qui vont au centre-ville aussi. Donc, tout ça pour dire que je vous invite à demander aux constructeurs de limiter la hauteur à 5 étages et d'acheter, s'il le faut, l'immeuble à côté qui est à vendre. Il y a une maison à côté qui est à vendre et qu'ils construisent un immeuble plus bas à hauteur humaine pour respecter l'héritage de la Côte-de-Sable. C'est tout ce que j'ai à dire.
Perfect timing.
Maintenant, Janice Illisoff, who lives,
Just
but
a
she's an
minute.
artist, so she'll speak.
Just a minute.
Okay.
I have her up next. Does anyone have any questions?
In English or French?
Merci. No, for the delegation? For la délégation? Thanks
You can
very-
ask in English. I speak English too.
D'accord.
I studied at McGill. No.
We have, no one's asking questions, so thank you very much,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you very much.
While Councillor Fleury is asking a question of staff, which we don't normally do this way, but Janice, come on down. Janice Eliassoff? Eliassoff? And Monique Deschênes? Is Monique here? Both of you come down, and Councillor...
And there's also Les.
So, Madam Chair, the question that I
Hang on a
have,
second. Does Les need to be here at the same time? Well, if the three of you are together, you're welcome to come up together, but otherwise, just stay there until they're finished, and then I'll call you.
my question's to staff, and I just want to hear the applicant, the delegation spoke to House staff and the analysis as it relates to the individually designated property and the proximity to the Heritage Conservation District. I just want to understand what was how do we feel that is not, we're not compromising the value of those properties and the intent of the Heritage Conservation District?
Okay, Monique, I'm taking the fact that you're standing way over there, that you're not part of the team? It's just that you registered together, so you don't have to speak together. It's up to you.
I'm first, she's second.
All right, then have a seat back in the audience. Oh, well, okay, but they're not together, though. Okay, so Janice?
Yes, thank you.
You're an artist.
My name is Janice Eliassoff. I live at 260 Besserer. I brought in this painting, which I painted about 10 years ago, when the building was under construction further along on Besserer, across King Edward from me, to give a long since completed, to give a sense of the distance from my window to that building on the other side of King Edward. Now, the building that's proposed, which is either 9 stories or 10 stories, depending on how you look at it, would come between my window and this building, and it would be much closer. So this building will become invisible to me, and I will have the construction right beside me. It's obvious from the photoshopped picture that shows the view from driving north along King Edward that the proposed building, with the height that is proposed, sticks out like a sore thumb and seems like a tentacle of the downtown construction mode into Sandy Hill. But the building is, in fact, in Sandy Hill, and this does not conform to the height restrictions. I'd just like to add, it's interesting to note that about 20 years ago, when my own building was built, I'm on the top floor, on the 7th floor. It was proposed to be 9 or 10 stories, but it was neighborhood pressure that brought it down to 7 stories, to the benefit, really, of all of us. And I think that tradition of keeping the height low should be maintained. The idea of taking a lot with a small parking lot, a small commercial building, replacing it with 99 residential units is going to be very disruptive. It's going to affect the quality of life. And as Denis pointed out, this neighborhood is a downtown destination in the evening. People coming to the Little Theater, they're coming to the repertory, the Bytown Cinema, and they look for on-street parking. But the proposed building has very, very little parking. And the argument is that if you rent a small residential unit that doesn't have parking, you won't have a car. Well, that's fine, but what if you're a student? Your parents will come to visit you, and they're not going to come by LRT or bus. They're going to drive in from Kingston or wherever and look for on-street parking. So that's the point I want to make, that so many of the problems we can foresee could be prevented by keeping the height to 7 stories or less, or providing more parking within the building for cars. That's basically my message.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? Hang on a second, just in case we have questions. For Janice? No, we don't have questions. So, so thank you, though. Monique, you can take that chair, but I'm going back to Councillor Fleury because he didn't get an answer to his question. Councillor Fleury.
I'll try to simplify my question because I think staff know what I'm asking, which is the property on the southern side of this development is individually designated. It's also on the edge of the Heritage Conservation District for that area. And I want to know how staff did their analysis as it relates to those two elements.
Thank you. Chair, as Councillor Fleury mentioned, this property 250 Besserer is not a designated building, but it is adjacent to a Part 4 and Part 5 designated building. So in terms of the heritage review, we looked at it in two ways. One, using the Sandy Hill Heritage Character Guidelines, which are policies for infill and design. The impact of the adjacency was assessed through a cultural heritage impact statement, which is included as part of this development, and that looked specifically at the distance between this building and the Part 4 building, the views from the Heritage Conservation District, and other elements such as that, but that is how the heritage was reviewed.
No follow-up? Perfect, thank you. Okay, Monique Deschênes.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to talk a little bit more on the height of the building, if I can. I'm noticing that the developer, of course, is calling this building 9 stories, but if you look at it, I see 10 stories. It appears that they might not be counting the main floor of the building. To me, this seems wrong. We're at 260 Bézerère. There's 7 floors in our building, and we count the main floor as a floor, even though there's no apartments. It's the lobby and so on. So I'm questioning why in this particular building, they don't seem to be counting that first floor. In my view, it's 10 floors. I would like them to confirm that it is indeed 10 floors and stop calling it 9 floors. Now, if they did call it 10 floors, they wouldn't be able to, at that point, it doesn't become a mid-rise apartment anymore. It's not, because mid-rise goes from 5 to 9, excuse me. So I'm thinking maybe that's why they're calling it a 9-story building, so that they can fall in the category of mid-size condos. And it's also excessive. I find that they're asking for the increase from 19 meters to 29.5 meters, when they're saying it's only a 9-floor building. Well, it would only be at this point 2 stories higher than ours. We're at 19.5 meters. So why are they requesting 10.5 meters more for supposedly 2 floors? So again, I'm thinking it looks like it's actually going to be a 10-story building. The other thing that greatly concerns us is this would set a precedent for these higher buildings in our neighborhood. There's nothing as it is now from Bézerère all the way to Wilbrod, east of King Edward, that is of that height. Ours is the highest at 7. So again, we don't really agree at all with the fact that they're asking for 10 meters more.
Hang on a second. Anybody have any questions for Ms. Deschênes? No, but Councillor Fleury, you want staff to comment on some of the things she said about height. What is the real height? What is the story?
Yeah, just again for record, what's the height that's permitted on that site?
I believe it's 19 meters. That's what we're talking. Because we originally wanted.
No. I'm asking staff.
Oh, I'm
so you can take your seat back in the audience. But thank you for having all that knowledge.
So the zoning right now is 19 meter, which translates into a generous 6-story. Okay, so that's the present zoning. And as I mentioned, the
What does generous 6-story mean? Does that mean like with height of the ceilings of today?
Well, if you do a calculation, it would be about 6.4 stories if you account for about 3 meters per story. So 18 meters being about 3 meters
10 feet.
high.
And if I may just add, Madam Chair, the height of the proposed building is 29.5 meters, which can be considered as a low 9-story building. If you go to the Exchange, for example, in Westboro, it's like 37 meters high, or the one at 236 Tweedsmuir on the corner of Tweedsmuir and Richmond, that's about 34 meters high. So in terms of a 9-story building, which is being proposed here, and they are using the slope, and we're taking the grade from the finished grade. So this is actually a lower 9-story building than you find anywhere out throughout the city, especially on main streets, for example.
Does that answer your question, do you think? Okay. Thank you again. Thank you for coming out. Okay, so next we have Les Idis. Les, did I say your name right that time? Les Idis? Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the first time I attended such a meeting, and I'm sorry if I'm a novice at this. I'm very impressed, by the way, how equitably you address all the issues, very incisive questions too. So I won't take up too much of your time. I just want to say that my concern about this building is that, and what the impression I have from the discussions I've heard here, is that you want to build community. I do not see this building community. You want families with kids. If you have families with kids, if you ever schlep hockey equipment around, you need a car. You can't schlep it around with 2 kids at 6 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night on a bus, on city buses. You may want to use public transport. I use public transport. I live down on Besserer Street. But when I have to go to Costco, I need a car. So this will not accommodate families. This will not accommodate families with kids. And that's not the character of Sandy Hill. Okay, so do I know Sandy Hill? I grew up on 209 Daly, which is an apartment, 60 Blackburn, and 66 Marlborough. I walked to school down on Osgood. That is community. It was community. I'm not looking for a time machine to bring me back to that, but if you guys want to build community, you want to build housing for families with kids, even if it's high density, you still want to accommodate families so that you build a community. You're not going to go down on Besserer Street, okay, with a carpet of needles because of the injection site, and then take a right turn on Nelson Street to go to you're going to take your kids to the school with a car, because that's the only way to get them there safely under current circumstances. So if you want to build community, I don't mind that building there. That would be wonderful to have a building that will accommodate family with kids, and you can build community. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for bringing that aspect about families and how they fit. Do you have any comment, Mr. Gauthier?
Well, this development will include bachelors, 1-bedrooms, and 2-bedrooms, if I'm correct. I should remind that it's at the edge of the community, the corner of Besserer and King Edward.
And Madam Chair, just to say too, in terms of not through the zoning or through any form can we regulate who lives there, if it's families or if it's students or if it's new people starting out in their first career or whatever. It's open to everyone. Now it's certainly open to families as well, but we just cannot regulate who lives there.
Okay, thank you. And we've learned that from other applications we've had over the last several years. Okay, Carl Fernie. And is that Kirk Mahoney with you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, Carl Fernie with FOTEM Planning, joined by Kirk Mahoney with 250 Besserer LP. He's the developer for the site.
Okay, you're going to have to slow down your voice a little bit because we have a terrible sound system anyways. You have to be closer to the mic, and you have to do everything you can to help us try to hear you because, yeah.
Challenging.
All right, thank you.
We're here in support of staff's recommendation. We know of the motion. Talked to Councillor Fleury about it. As he noted, our only concern with the motion was changing the shall to a may so that we can further implement this car share and keep it in perpetuity without running out of compliance one way or the other. So it would be an or statement. And we're here for any specific questions related to the application.
I just want to say that on that, I mean, I don't want you to take it lightly because it actually makes a lot of sense to have that opportunity. And I would like to know that when you get into site plan, that sort of thing, that you're actually going to, I'd like to see some evidence that you've tried to reach out to that kind of service to have, to see whether or not it's viable and whether they'd be interested. You know, just the location itself, it might be regardless of the people that are all the people that may live there and what their needs might be, just the community could be very supportive of that kind of an opportunity. Anybody have any questions? No? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. So we have anything else you want to, no? Okay. We do have the technical amendment that was moved by Councillor Lieber. We didn't vote on that yet, did we? No. Yes, sure. And wrap up, please. That's where I was going with, yeah. I was surprised when you didn't say anything.
No, I didn't realize, Madam Chair, that the that delegations were completed, so I apologize. So I'll start on the zoning matters, and some are comments, some are more philosophical. So the applicant is going from what would be required to be above around 44 parking spots on the property, and the city is comfortable with a waiver down to 0. I just want to put numbers to that. So if the applicant was required to provide 40 spots-ish, I'm just using the round figure 40, I believe the number is a bit higher, but let's say 40. We know from the industry, and I'm using a very conservative number, that building a parking spot in a concrete form is around $40,000. That'd be $1.6 million cost for them to additionally to build that property. They're not providing that yet. With working with the city, they're providing some visitor parking. Talked about the car sharing and some internal bike parking, which are all very good. But I want to highlight kind of philosophically two things. One, which is by committees or by staff's position and committee's review, if we are to waiver the parking, there's $1.6 million waiver on the cost for that developer of what would be in zoning. Imagine if our goals in waiving of the parking would be for use of transit, for use of cycling, for walking. Imagine if a portion of that amount was transferred to bus pass value for the users of that property over time. That would be great to showcase what is the intent of that property. I know I'm making more of a statement here, but I think that we need to get serious about when we do look at waiver of parking for the right reasons, to leverage LRT, to leverage the urban environment that we're in. We also need to factor in what is the value, what is the waiver of those costs to the development industry, and find a compromise so that we can properly demonstrate what would be the value of that for those who move in and for the community in general. I recognize it's a general comment. That said, we ask as part of the development applications to prepare a transportation plan for various reasons, and we mandate that through the OP. I would like us as part of the OP to also include, when there are waivers of parking, that we require the applicant to provide a cycling plan and a transit plan. The applicants are more and more saying we're going to reduce the amount of parking, yet they're not required to provide plans as it relates to other mobility modes. So I know I'm pushing that forward and asking Mr. Willis as part of the OP review to include that from a development industry perspective, that we look at requiring that when there are waivers of parking regulations, that the applicant does provide cycling plan and a transit plan. Because to me, it's a mobility plan that would be, and I'm not asking for an answer today. I think that's something that we can work forward as part of the OP efforts.
And I just suggest, based on what you're talking about right now in the OOP, is on December the 9th, we're having a joint meeting of ARAC and this planning committee on the official plan. You might want to make a note in your calendar to come back and talk about that.
And my last piece on zoning, after I'll share with you briefly the comments, is we've heard from the delegations as it relates to height, the proximity to the HCD and its interaction, and the proximity to the existing neighbor, which is an individually designated property. I want to paint the picture along Besserer. We've seen a lot of development. We have the two Richcraft properties. You have the Claridge Phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. You have the building which residents, the delegations come from, is next, not immediate next door, but right beside it, which is a domicile development. Being here and seeing how our intensification policies and what we're looking for, I stand in a weird position to say that there's a big issue with the 10-story because it's at the corner of King Edward and Besserer. That said, I do believe that we have to be very sensitive to when we allow additional density next to a heritage conservation district, next to a heritage designated property. I do feel that staff have their own response to it, and I'm not an expert, so I can only rely on what metric staff are using from the existing property to the setback. I do think that from a holistic point of view, we have to be careful. For Sandy Hill, we have 7 different heritage conservation districts, 7 different zones, and how properties will interact with those matters. So I do feel that the community raises key concerns as it relates to protection of those HCDs and individual properties. I'll move on to the site plan and things that I'll be working towards. There are existing issues at the intersection of Besserer and King Edward. As you know, from Daly to Besserer, it is a downhill slope. The pedestrians have highlighted safety concerns, especially in the evenings and in winter, for that crosswalk. So I want to work with city and the applicant to develop a strategy at the corner on the north side of the intersection on Besserer and King Edward to provide a new crosswalk so that pedestrians have an alternative on the north side. I will also ask the applicant to provide each future renter a cycling plan of the area, as the cycling options from that location are very limited. Besserer on the other side of King Edward is one way towards that property. King Edward is less than ideal for cycling. You're a block off at King Edward and Rideau from the interprovincial truck route. So if the city believes that cycling and its proximity to the LRT is right, then I'm asking the applicant through site plan to develop for future renters what are the best corridors for cycling in the area.
I don't understand, I don't know about anybody else, but how is one applicant going to provide
The applicant has agreed that they would put in the lease and on location where there's 99, I believe?
99 units and 99 bicycle parking spaces inside, plus 14 visitors outside.
Which is great, but I want a display of what would be the cycling routes to get to and from main amenities to the area provided to future renters. So I believe everyone's on board, but for the public record, what I'll be working on with the applicant. Garbage management has been a bad issue in the area. If you go down Besserer on private pickup days, containers will be put to curb and left as to when the private pickup will come. The applicant, we're going to tighten up in the site plan when the garbage will be picked up, and the applicant is favorable to that. Also, move-in, we're quite concerned with the flow of move-in and move-out of that property. So I've asked the applicant to relook, and the city planner is working with them to make it easy for someone to bring in their U-Haul move-in van into the garage and properly move in from within the garage, not from the curb on Besserer. And then the final one, Madam Chair, is rooftop. In a multi-res, non-condo environment, rooftops are challenging. The applicant has recognized the materials that will be used for the rooftop elevator shaft components need to be worked through to be sympathetic. There is a rental apartment building two blocks south of that at the corner of Stewart and King Edward, and that would be their forever view. So the applicant and staff are sensitive to that, and also to bring in a fob system to limit the access of that rooftop in late evening and overnight. So again, this is the elements that I'll be working with city, the applicant, and the community going forward in site plan.
Okay, so that's important heads up on site plan. And I know that staff have done a lot of work on this. Mr. James, did you have anything or
Madam Chair, just add that the council's concerns, we met last Friday with the applicant and went through them, and a lot of them can be addressed, or we'll look at those. These are site plan issues that we'll look at and deal with through that process, yes.
Good. Anybody else have any questions on 250 Besserer? No? So on the application, just a minute, on the amendment, a move by, no, it's you. No, it's you. It's Leaper. Well, on his motion. On the motion? Right. Yes? Okay, and on the report as amended? Carried, thank you. And now we're on to Florence. I know, I asked her, why are you here? She's here, I forget. So let's just, the next two items fit together. We're going to deal with them together, which is 58 Florence Street. So if I could have staff up here for that. And then somebody held the terms of, you know what, the terms of council priorities, we're bumping that to the back, because that is just you asking the question, and we have speakers speaking to the budget. All right. So is Paul Couvrette here? Come on up, Paul. Paul, I'm going to ask you to speak to your opposition on both items, both the application for demolition and new construction at 58 Florence Street, and also on the zoning bylaw amendment for 58 Florence Street. Okay? Thank you. Go ahead, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Heritage, basically. The due diligence on Heritage, I felt, was a little bit weak. I'm here to basically explain that that building did, in fact, have heritage significance. One of the most famous journalists in Canada lived in that building for 12 years. His name is Charles Lynch, and basically he died there. 1982 to 1994, I believe. But that's a side issue. My main issue is literally with the protection of my home. The corner building basically was built by a person who will go unnamed. It's called Tega. That building I protested and...
Did you say Tega?
Pardon me?
Did you say Tega?
Tega Homes. That building I protested and explained that it would destroy my neighborhood. It in fact did destroy my neighborhood. They went down 5 stories. They got proper city approval, proper Stantec planning, and basically they sucked all the moisture out of the area. The damages to the neighboring buildings for 100 feet amounted to $2.8 million. Now this is why that building is basically falling over. It's falling over because the soil in that area is completely destroyed, okay? Now, my biggest concern, I understand that they're doing helical piles. That building won't fall down. My biggest concern is that they are digging about 3 feet from my foundation. My building was built in 1903. It's stone on stone foundation. It won't take this. And it will basically either flood my basement or destroy that wall. The previous building by Tega, I should tell you, was the subject of numerous complaints. Those complaints went to the city, and the city consequently ended up doing a stop work order. That stop work order miraculously disappeared within 48 hours. The building started falling at 72 hours. The stop work order was not reinstituted. That building also was involved in something that I've kept secret for many, many years, which was either a collusion or an incompetence by the City of Ottawa regarding that building, and $1 million loss to the taxpayers, which I will reveal at some point in the future. Basically, my concerns are that I have seen no reason to basically give this builder a greater set of rules or laws than already exist within the city plans, but they've obviously allowed it, and most of my concerns have been put aside or dealt with. A few were dealt with fairly, and that's fine. But I have major objections to the concept of building that close to my building.
Thank you. So let me ask you a question. Anytime that we do anything with new development and that, even infill development, even in the suburbs, there always is a plan through the process that the applicant do offer an analysis of the nearby buildings, et cetera. And, you know, whether, I mean, I can think of many times that it's happened where somebody will go in, in fact, we had an Esso station on Fallowfield at Wolfgang, and it had been there for a long time, and then a small builder came along and wanted to put a condo unit in there, which was the first condos in Barrhaven, which was like, wow, we're doing that. So they had to put a basement in with underground parking and that kind of thing. And you know where I'm talking about, eh? So, but every single person was offered video taping of the inside of their foundation and that sort of thing. Are you not being offered that?
I'm being offered that. I was offered that by Tega Corporation. Tega Corporation paid none of the property holders. We all had to sue them. We also sued the city.
Have you been offered that for this application?
I certainly have. I've been offered it by a couple of different people. But basically, that still doesn't do me any good, because literally when Tega dug down and took all the water away, what happened is that buildings fell down. My garage across the street on Gladstone was closed for a year and never recovered. Never, ever recovered. Now, this was done by Stantec, by the way, I can mention their name, a proper firm, reviewed by the City of Ottawa, I'm certain, but it didn't work. It was a failure. I'm concerned about another failure.
So given the history of the area, Mr. James, I mean, have there been like soil testing and that sort of thing, geological testing happening at all?
Well, Madam Chair, this development is subject to site plan, and that would be part of the site plan application. They would have to do a geotechnical study to show how this could be done. And in relation to as well, this we're referring to back and forth as a pre-construction survey would need to be done as well, and that would be a condition of approval as part of the site plan. So it would be done, yes.
Because it's really important to have that done. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Couvret?
Yeah, sorry, I do. Thank you for coming in, Paul. It's nice to see you. So just to be clear, so 429 Kent was the condo that was built?
Correct.
58 Florence, which is the application in front of us today.
Right.
What you're telling us today was that 58 Florence was damaged as a result. I understand what you're saying, that the entire area in terms of the soil structure, but 58 Florence was damaged as a result of 429 Kent, which is on the corner.
Correct.
And now 58 Florence is beside you.
Correct.
And obviously the concern is 58 Florence, being right beside, will then lead to further damage, which once it happens, it happens. Right. Is that correct? And you're prepared to have you're prepared to have the building condition assessment done in your basement, all of that prior to. I'm not saying that that's the only thing that needs to be done. I'm just making sure that that is the case. Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. So I do have some concerns from with staff. I don't have concerns about necessarily the application with respect to the number of units or the height, but I do want to make sure that that what we're hearing today is being considered. Do we go ahead with those questions?
Yep,
Okay.
go ahead.
Nobody has any other questions?
No,
on
no one has
Mr.
any other
Couvret?
questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Couvret.
Okay. So, do you know, so at site plan, there will be the geotechnical survey that will that will tell us what the soil conditions are, the clay conditions, what's happened at 429 Kent in that surrounding area, and what the risks are to any neighboring properties, in particular 54 Florence.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. That's correct. So we have a geotechnical report. Our engineer on the file has reviewed that report, and we have provided comments to the applicant, and we're looking for more information. And they need to provide us evidence that their engineering solution for the excavation and construction will not negatively impact any neighboring properties.
Okay, so before site plan, then I'm not saying that I'm lifting delegated authority now, but I'm saying that I'm putting you on notice that I may lift delegated authority on site plan. I want to be able to be assured that there will be no further damage in the area. This 429 does precede my time on council, but I have I've read a lot of the background on it, and much of what Mr. Couvret says today is of a concern. So so just to say that I want to be kept apprised as we move along, and that I will lift delegated authority on site plan if I'm not assured that that Mr. Couvret's concerns aren't fully addressed.
Certainly, and Madam Chair, the report with the geotechnical conditions will be sent to the Councillor for concurrence, and we'll be more than happy to sit down with her and bring the project manager who's on the file with that to sit down there with you and discuss the conditions relating to geotechnical study.
And also, in terms of the shoring of the property, as Mr. Couvret laid out, it's very close to his property. It's a very old building that he's in, that he owns, that he's concerned about. So in terms of the shoring, the water runoff that is close to his foundation, all of that will be addressed.
Through you, Madam Chair. So through the building permit process, the applicant will need to provide information about shoring and excavation, and we can work with Building Code Services to ensure that the information that they provide is sufficient and that we're satisfied that there will not be negative impacts on neighboring properties.
But by building permit, we're too late to stop anything. Like it's beyond site plan, is that
So
correct?
through the site plan as well, we're looking for more information at this point because we're not satisfied right now with their geotechnical report.
Okay, so I will be looking for information on shoring excavation at site plan if otherwise I will lift delegated authority and bring it back to committee and council. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gower?
So a quick comment on the demolition of 58 Florence Street, which Built Heritage Subcommittee considered and approved. You know, it is a real shame that we do not have more tools to penalize, fine, you know, when extremely unfortunate circumstances like this happen to heritage buildings and also important buildings to the community. I know there's, where we heard from the delegation, there's some civil litigation happening, but it's unfortunate that we don't have more tools at our disposal to punish or to deal with developers or property owners who may not be as careful as they should be when they're doing construction nearby heritage homes.
Anyone have anything else? No? So, on the applicant, what? Oh, Murray, you're still here. It's hard to see you. You don't sit in an obvious place.
Today, Madam
Little,
Chair.
you know, I know when it was crowded, but
I have my
otherwise,
favorite spot, but it was occupied when I arrived.
Okay, which one
this
are you
morning.
speaking to? Both? Or are you speaking to?
I'll speak to both of the reports that are before you, and I will be brief because I'm supposed to be in another meeting with staff at the moment. So simply support the recommendations from staff on both the rezoning and the heritage permit application. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the concerns from the neighbor and the ward councillor with respect to, I guess I'll present it this way. It's a reaction to the damage that was done to 58 Florence by the excavation for the condominium on the corner at Kent Street. And without minimizing the concern, I want to just point out a few things. That you've heard from the delegate that the excavation at the corner went down 5 stories to accommodate underground parking. The excavation for this building is going to go down 5 feet. So the comparable risks are quite minimal. Our client is fully aware of the concerns. We're fully aware of the concerns that were raised by staff, and certainly I've had a conversation with the chief building official about this project so that, you know, we all know what the concern is, and it will be adequately addressed through one or both of the site plan or the building permit process. I am relieved this afternoon to hear from the neighbor that he actually will allow our clients to complete a pre-construction investigation, because I do have an email from him saying the exact opposite. So I'm hoping that what I heard today is in fact the level of cooperation that we're going to have with the neighbor to be able to go and do a pre-construction survey, so there's no doubt down the road as to whether or not there has been damage as a result of the excavation. This isn't a terribly unique project. This is no different than infill projects all across the city. And so our client will be taking the normal precautions and addressing those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Chown, who I almost forgot about? Thank you very much. Okay. I guess 2 in a row that were heads up on site plan when we get to that. So on item number 12, which is the application for demolition and new construction of 58 Florence Street, a property located in the Centertown Heritage Conservation District designated under Part 5. So on this item, is it carried? Thank you. Don't you have to leave? And on item number 13, which is a zoning bylaw amendment at 58 Florence Street, approve an amendment to the zoning to permit a 3-story low-rise apartment dwelling. On that item, is it carried? Thank you. Thanks very much. So as I said to Councillor Fleury, even though he held the term of council priorities and just said he wanted to be on the record, we still have people that are here to speak on the budget. So we're going to go to the budget. And Councillor Hubley has to leave. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Does anybody, we have bare quorum, does anyone need to have a little bit of a break for like, yeah, okay, we're going to take 5-minute break for a washroom, okay? Or whatever you want to do. And get 5 minutes. Set your alarms. Why would you say that out loud? 6 seconds. Well, we don't at the table. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Where's my 5th? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I think I won't. Hello. I know you're all excited to talk about the planning committee budget to the point where we're not even having a presentation. Okay, we do have speakers. I'm going to see who's left here. I know that Raymond Sullivan said that he wasn't going to be, that he submitted a submission, but is not going to stay to speak. What about Christine Santel? Well, come on down, Christine. And is Casey Hunley here? Okay. And who's Kulad Beg? Your 2 people? Yeah. Okay. Get ready because after Christine, it'll be your turn. Come on up.
Okay.
Welcome.
Good afternoon,
Thank
Madam.
you for hanging around.
Madam Chair and all the members of the committee. My name is Christine Santelé. I'm a member and a low-income person experiencing disability and a resident of Vanier. I'm also a member and a volunteer with GAWI, City for All Women Initiative, and the Street Transportation Coalition. I want to thank you for the $15 million investment in affordable housing in the City of Ottawa draft budget of 2020. Well, while we need to do a lot more to address the affordable housing crisis in the City of Ottawa, the $15 million is a step in the right direction. I'm here today particularly to speak to how the $15 million is to be spent. I strongly advocate that the investment be made in building affordable housing near rapid transit stations so that individuals like me who completely rely on public transportation infrastructure can have easier access to LRT rather than depending on bus that often add significant time to commute. Many people live on a low income, are reliant on public transportation as their only means of transportation, and in the past and today, critical transit infrastructure has not been systematically planned to benefit the most vulnerable. I would also like to speak to my experience as an individual on ODSP and the challenge of finding inclusive, accessible, and affordable housing for individuals on disability spectrum. There is also presently a critical shortage of housing in Ottawa for 34,639 Ontario Disability Support Plan beneficiaries. I would strongly urge the city to implement and enforce a bylaw that would require all the new rental housing to be fully accessible and that 25% of all private market rental units be identified as inclusive and affordable. This will ensure a full spectrum of mixed income tenants, allowing a better integration of the community. As I stated earlier, the need for affordable housing benefiting the most vulnerable community is urgent. What I would like to see is that the City of Ottawa continue to invest at least $15 million a year in affordable housing in every annual budget. I would also urge the city to pass a strong citywide inclusionary zoning bylaw that ensure 25% of new development is dedicated to affordable housing and place a special emphasis on deeply affordable housing within 1 kilometer of a rapid transit station. Thank you for listening, and I'm waiting for your decision in response to my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Anyone have any questions for Christine? Thanks for waiting today.
Thank you.
Casey Hunley and Khalid Beg. And so who are you?
My name is Casey.
Hi. And you're Khalid?
Yes.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, Chair Harder and council members. My name is Kate.
Okay, before you start, this is yours?
Oh, yes.
And we all have a copy.
Yes.
Thank you.
My name is Casey Hunley, and I work for the Wabano Centre for Aboriginal Health. I am the Anti-Human Trafficking Education Coordinator, and I'm also the chair for the subcommittee to support Indigenous women through Octiva. I'm here with Khalid Beg. She is the Community Engagement Coordinator for Cowie, and she's a housing advocate for Indigenous women's housing. We know that Indigenous women face violence as a direct result of Ottawa's community housing crisis. We are here today to emphasize the importance of ensuring that Indigenous women are heard and included in planning the city's housing strategy. 2/3 of human trafficking cases in the country are happening in Ontario, and most of it is happening to people born and raised here. Indigenous women are vastly overrepresented in cases of human trafficking. Indigenous women make up 4% of the population, but represent 50% of human trafficking targets. Ottawa has the highest rates of human trafficking in the country per capita, with rates reported 5 times higher than the national level. This crisis is invisible, and it is perpetuated by the lack of accessible, secure, affordable housing for everyone, but especially for Indigenous women and girls. I'm here to urge the city and the planning committee to assume responsibility for our women. The city has allocated another $15 million to affordable housing in Budget 2020, and we have a responsibility to ensure that this budget does not allow the violence against our women to continue. Housing and human trafficking are intrinsically linked. Women and girls in insecure housing are more likely to be targeted for trafficking and face greater obstacles when trying to escape. This is because a lack of secure, affordable, and accessible housing puts women in situations where their main concern is their survival and the survival of their children. Women that we work with have stated that affordable housing is often in areas and neighborhoods where women don't feel safe. And for trafficked women, this could mean encountering the trafficker that they are trying to escape from. When women are finally able to escape situations of human trafficking, affordable housing has been shown to be the single most important factor for their recovery and reintegration. Without this basis, women are unable to pursue the education or career opportunities that they need to get back on their feet after months, if not years, of exploitation. As I conclude, I would like to urge the Planning Committee to consult Indigenous women and their communities when building affordable housing in the city. The City of Ottawa must continue to invest in affordable housing and increase this investment by $30 million in the upcoming budgets. Finally, the city must implement an inclusionary zoning bylaw in Ottawa that situates affordable housing in mixed-income neighborhoods, thereby bringing vibrant and safe neighborhoods for all communities. Ottawa is facing a housing crisis, and Indigenous women are at the center of it. Secure, affordable, and accessible housing is essential to preventing violence against Indigenous women because it ensures that women and girls are not being put into situations of violence or desperation from which they have nowhere to go. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your response to my concerns.
Thank you very much. And so, Ms. Van Buskirk, I would be surprised to hear that you don't consult with Indigenous women when you're taking into consideration planning affordable housing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As recently as last week, Donna Gray, the General Manager, and myself met with the Indigenous Community Advisory Board, and we've been working with the Aboriginal Community Advisory Board over the last year in regards to our 10-year housing and homelessness plan to make sure that they were involved and that we incorporate their recommendations around changes that are needed to the housing system in general, and also changes that are needed to the housing system for Indigenous peoples. So we look forward to having a section in our refresh plan that directly addresses those needs.
Can I address a question and ask?
But you can speak by yourself if you want, but not right now.
Okay.
You came up as a package, and that's the way that you delivered it. And so you've been here long enough, you've seen other people. I mean, we have to have rules, and we have to stick by them. So if you want to go and take a seat for a minute, I'll call you back up, and you can speak on your own. But that's, if I don't have rules, it's mad chaos here on sometimes, okay?
No, that's
All right.
understandable. I think I'll hold off.
Okay, perfect. So now, question for you, either of you actually. You've tossed out a number here of increase it by 30 million in the upcoming budgets. And then you've added in the inclusionary zoning, which is the direction that we're going in. But the 30 million, where did you come up with that money? That's in addition to the 15 million. And where would you think that we could get that money from?
Well, so this is actually one of the advocacy directions that the City for All Women initiative is going from, and we've gotten this direction from, well, mainly from our resident tables, because we sit on a lot of resident tables specifically with the violence against women shelters, and we talk to city councilors and we talk to people around different tables. And one of the key reasons this figure has come up is because we need to increase our investment in the affordable housing sector as much as we're supporting the shelters and as much as we're spending on emergency responses in the city. So that's one of the places where this figure has come from. And then secondly, the idea has been tossed around, and I think this is something that's coming up in our advocacy directions, but the idea has been tossed around that we want to increase, there needs to be like a tax levy increase that then factors into the $30 million towards building affordable housing, because the housing crisis in Ottawa currently and the lack of affordable housing is impacting women, and it's resulting in violence towards women, specifically from marginalized groups. So this has come from our community effort, our action forums on housing, but it has also come on from our meetings with various city councilors and policy staff.
So on that, you said that maybe a tax increase. What do you think others say that already think that they pay too much taxes, or have other things? Say for example, if you were here early this morning, I think, so I was talking about how the fact that we have the people that have increased the development charges and have increased the contributions and the numbers of people in this city, so we have more money to spend in the growth area, for example, have really been so underserved by the amount of roads that they have. Even though they are paying every time they buy a home or contributing to the places they rent and the homes that are being built, or investments in affordable housing, and no matter where you are, like in Barrhaven, I have some very lovely, I mean, people are always saying, hey, where can I buy one of those condos? And maybe it's multi-faith housing or it's European housing. I mean, we are doing that. I can tell you that last night I was at a hockey game for one of my grandsons at Bell Arena, and there was a bunch of people there, largely from Barrhaven, and they said, you know, when are you going to approve the budget? I said, well, you know, what do you think? I said, it's, you know, coming up December the 11th, and I said, you know, we have planning committee tomorrow, and et cetera, and they said, you know, I don't really want to pay you 3% more. I don't want to do that. Why are you doing it? I said, well, like the mayor says all the time, we have a balance. We have to create a balance, so we're serving everybody. People who are, you know, needing cycling facilities, infrastructure, more people that are better plowing of sidewalks, all of that stuff. to balance that out, you've got to come up with something that's fair. So that's why I asked you specifically, like 30 million, is that like phased in over like maybe 10 years or something like that? Because it's not going to be $30 million, I think. Even if somebody moved it, let's be honest, it would not pass at budget. There's too many priorities for too many people that in most cases, I think a lot of people are saying, I'm already paying a lot. And in the case of affordable housing, they think they are there too. I have just a question too on affordable housing. Shelley, do we have an idea of where we sit as far as big cities go on the amount of money that we're, that 15 million, what does it look like? Because is there something that we should be wanting to get to, like bridging to a higher amount? How do we look vis-a-vis other cities in Canada?
Madam Chair, so Housing Services is currently undertaking a long-range financial plan to look at exactly what you're talking about, to look at what do we actually need in a growing city around affordable housing, how do we increase affordability and what does that look like, and how do we increase homelessness solutions. So that's a plan that we're going to be bringing back in Q3 of next year to look at the housing system and our needs over an extended period of time to identify the resources we do need to make a difference.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not that it's not a high priority. It's just that there's only so much money. And so, but you didn't answer my question. How are we doing with the amount of money? Because it's really only when Mayor Watson was first elected that we increased the amount of money significantly. So I'm just wondering.
Madam Chair, so the 15 million in budget 2019, we leveraged that with other federal programs, and it was approximately approvals for about 266 units. So we hope to do the same with the new 15 million that's in budget 2020. We'll bring a spending plan for that money to Committee and Council in Q1 of next year. So if you look at what $15 million buys you, if you're building affordable housing, look at $130,000 per door. So, I mean, we really need other levels of government to come to the table with their resources for us to be able to create new affordable supply.
You still didn't answer my question, but the fact is that people at the Federation of Community and Municipalities level, people at the at all levels, really, or all committees, whether it's the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, large Canadian city mayors caucus. That's always one of the very first, if not the first, ask out of their mouths. Every time that AMO comes to town, we are saying, affordable housing. We don't even just say it just in the community services minister that is in charge of that. We say it when we meet with Steve Clark. We say it when we meet with any opportunity we have. So it is a high priority for us. I know that for a fact. What I'm saying is we have to find a way to balance everybody's needs. I think you had questions, did you?
Thanks. I'm in the same vein as what you've been asking, Chair Harder. Just to preface, I'll throw out the numbers that I don't think the Treasurer has challenged me on yet, but I'm glad she's here in case I'm wrong again. But a 1% tax increase on the property tax bill in Ottawa raises roughly $15 or $16 million. It costs the average homeowner of a $404,000 house roughly $75 a year. I'm not wrong yet. So, we're going to have a 3% tax increase this year. $15 million is obviously 1/3 of that 3% tax increase. And thank you very much, Shelley, for giving us the number. That builds 266 units. We have 12,000 people on our waiting list in Ottawa for affordable housing. I think it is... one of the reasons that I will likely support the budget this year, I haven't always, is because the Mayor's office and the Treasurer's office were able to dig deep and find that 15 million again. I was cynical that we would be able to. When you take a look at that tax increase and putting 1/3 of it towards affordable housing, I think that is actually really progressive. But it buys 266 units out of 12,000. The help we need is from our federal and our provincial levels of government. A $75 increase in taxes to get 1% is a lot, especially if you're on a fixed income. we can't build enough housing on the property tax base that the municipal government has. We need it to come from those senior levels of government that have income taxes that they can leverage. But how many women, just to get a sense for the numbers, how many women are in sort of immediate need with whom you're working?
So unfortunately, there's a lot of barriers to getting stats on this, which is why I didn't throw any out. So for accuracy's sake, I can't give you exact numbers, but I can speak to the final MMIW report that cites, I believe it was, thousands of women in Ontario that are currently underhoused or in precarious housing, Indigenous women specifically.
So we can probably assume hundreds of women in Ottawa?
At least, yes.
Okay.
A lot of my work involves working alongside people that do direct outreach to women that don't have housing currently. And that is where a lot of our information has come from, is specifically from these women's lived experiences. So we know it's happening in our city, and I think to speak just briefly to the concerns about raising taxes, I would just like to point out that it does in fact cost more to have more police on the streets because of human trafficking, to have more people in hospitals because of human trafficking, potentially than just putting that money toward safe housing.
Yeah, and the transition is the difficult part. We are not able to spend money that we spend on shelter on housing because of the silos that are put in place. But we know we need shelter. And so even if every dollar that we put into shelter was put into housing today, the need for that shelter would fill back up again until we achieve some sort of equilibrium. And I don't know how many years that is going to take. It's going to take more dollars in the system overall as upfront investment to get us to that point where we start achieving savings from having people housed rather than being sheltered. My second question for you is with respect to the definition of affordability. So there's a Doug Ford definition, a Justin Trudeau definition of affordability, which I think is important, which is for many of us, I live in Hintonburg. My son will never be able to afford a house in Hintonburg. He's probably going to struggle to afford a house in the newest suburbs in Barrhaven. The housing prices are going up.
Excuse me.
That is... yeah, it is. It's a real problem. I hear it at the door, and oftentimes when voters are talking to me about housing affordability, they're actually thinking about their kids who are going to struggle to afford to buy a first home. And then, of course, we have the issue of affordable housing with respect to our most vulnerable residents, for whom homeownership is probably a distant dream, who are going to struggle to afford rent as a reasonable proportion of whatever benefits or income they're bringing in. How do you differentiate between that different type of affordable housing, and what is the more important one?
I think one of the definitions that Kawi has taken support of is this idea of a deeply affordable housing, and we've mentioned it multiple times before. But the idea of deeply affordable really is that housing at a rate that it doesn't take away from other basic needs in your life. So just because you need to afford housing, you don't have to go access food banks. And just because you need to afford housing, you don't have to decrease the heat in your house. And just because you need to afford housing, you don't have to take away from other aspects that contribute to the well-being and quality of your life. And I believe there's a figure on it, and I don't have it, but I can follow up on it. But I believe it's a certain percentage of your house that Kawi has costed out, and it has taken this example. But the overall idea goes into speaking about the adequacy of housing and how housing itself should not be a determining factor to your poverty. Okay. So that's how we are defining deeply affordable. And then again, like, it comes from our multiple tables where people of lived experience sit and they contribute to these definitions. And we work closely with groups like Alliance, and we work closely with the VAW shelters where we get these definitions and we get this support for this idea. So that's how we are defining. And we did the Housing Action Forum where the idea of deeply affordable came up. But this idea that housing does not take away from anything else that you need, like your basic necessities of life, which can be food, which can be transit, which can be moving around the city, so on and so forth.
Yep, daycare, yeah, absolutely. I'll leave it there, but thank you very much. It's a critical presentation. I am encouraged with where the city is going, but there is only so much municipalities can do. Housing ultimately is a federal and a provincial responsibility. I want to congratulate the treasurer and the mayor for digging deep and finding this funding this year, but our partners need to do more. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, very good points. Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so
out
much.
today.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. We don't have a motion on this? Nothing. Okay. We do have a roadmap, but do you need to go by the, oh, yeah.
Questions on that portion
I
of the
thought
budget?
that you held the other thing.
I'm here for both.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, so then maybe let's do the roadmap.
For
We're going to do the roadmap, and you tell me when it is that you want to talk, okay? I'm going to read it out.
Well, my questions are as relate page 51 and 55 of the budget.
Then I will, that's the Planning Committee capital budget, okay? So I'll hold that item, but I'm going to go over each one of the things. That's the last item here? Okay, so that the Planning Committee recommends the council, this is you reading this, sitting as Committee of the Whole, approve the Planning Committee 2020 draft operating capital budget. 1, as follows. Right-of-way, heritage, and urban design as follows. User fees on pages 4 to 9, is that carried? Operating resource requirement, page 3? Carried. B, planning services, excluding building code services, Ontario Building Code, as follows. 1, user fees, pages 12 to 21. Carried. Operating resource requirement, page 11. Carried. Building code services, Ontario Building Code, as follows. 1, user fees, pages 25 to 30. 2, operating resource requirement, page 24. D, long-range planning, operating resource requirement, page 32. Carried. 2, community and social services, affordable housing operating resource requirement, page 34. Carried. And held for Councillor Fleury is the Planning Committee capital budget, page 35, individual projects listed on pages 51 and 53. Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was not engaging with the delegations, but I do share similar concerns. I want to, on one hand, recognize that before last year, we did not have certainty around new housing dollars for capital. We did have it in previous terms over, I believe it was the first term I was in office, which was in 2010. We did $4 million per year for the 4 years, which was $16 million. But we haven't had capital until, I guess it's this year's budget for some time from the city point of view. So I'm happy that we're matching the previous year, but I want to share with committee my concerns. And it's important that you understand the economics of this. I'm not using the same figure as Shelley, but I'll use a different figure, which I believe to be simple. So if we are to spend an additional $15 million, that would house, divide the amount by 300,000. That's roughly what it costs to build a unit, just a general number. Okay, I'm using that figure just for sake of discussion. We could house 50 people. If we then flip it the other way, if we are not to house 50 people, what's the cost of that? So take that number, 50 people. In this case, let's use the one that we all agree is the easiest to house, families. So families today are in motels. That's $110 a night. So do the numbers. 50 people times 110 times 365. You can argue with me, will the person be in a motel for a year? The average is around 8 months. But
It's 123 days.
And this continues to vary based on pressure. But let's use that as a stat. That is $2 million a year-ish. So we're on some ways we're putting, and I'm using a small segment of what's in our motels and shelters. We're operationalizing a pressure that's costing us more than what we could in housing folks. And what I'm going to get, I sat down with Marianne very briefly at CPS, and again, I'll reaffirm that I would really like that we correct the governance issue. This particular item fits better with CPS. We deal with the shelters. We deal with some of the social services component of this budget. It makes it odd for me to be in front of you because we deal with it at CPS. I've sat on that committee for now 9 years. So hopefully at midterm governance, we can get an agreement that that small portion of your piece be transferred to CPS so that we can have that holistic conversation. But where I was going with it is currently the $15 million will be funded out of which pockets? And maybe Marianne could answer that question. The $15 million for the proposal is out of which pockets?
It's on the screen in front of you, Councillor.
Maybe just for record?
It's the housing reserve is 11.25 and the development charges reserve is 3.75.
Right. So we're not going into debt to provide that $15 million. And you're going to think it's crazy, but every dollar of pressure that we have on our shelters, that we have to balance our budget. So we operationalize that additional pressure for keeping people in motels and shelters. The money that we got from the province, which was capped in 2012, was around $22 million. Last year, we spent $32 million. So that's $10 million additionally that we're finding ways to fund. Yet we're not housing more people. We're keeping them without a key to their own unit. I think we need to rethink of the algorithm of the economics of this, because if we were to borrow $15 million, it would cost us in repayment of that mortgage $850,000 a year. Yet to house them, that's a pressure for not housing them of $2 million. So I'd love for us to explore. I've spoken to Shelley and Donna. They're looking in terms of the long-term financial plan. They'll come back with a substantial plan, which I believe to be the right approach. But I think we have to start talking about that on record of what is the economics. We're spending a lot of money on operations. We want to make sure no one sleeps on the street, yet we're not housing them. We're keeping them in very temporary conditions. So I will be bringing that forward. And then for the planning components, I would, just for the record, what are the, on page 51, item 909890, $3.9 million, could Shelley or someone from the team speak as to what is the Ontario Housing Priorities Initiative? And my second element is page 55, which is item 906565, which is the IAH element, which is $23.3 million. So both of those items, could we just, for our knowledge, what are they used for?
Madam Chair, so the Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative is a new program from the province. It's part of the province's community housing renewal strategy. So it replaces a previous program called the Investing in Affordable Housing Extension Program, which ran from 2014 to 2020. So this is a new pot of funding. We have a 3-year allocation from the provincial government. So what we have to spend in 2020 is the $3.9 million. It can be invested, it will be invested in the development of new affordable housing to support our Ontario Renovates program. There also is the ability under that pot of funding to move it into an operating stream and use it for housing allowances and rent supplements. In respect to the other item on page 55, the IAH rental housing, the $23.3 million, that's our master account for housing. So it's holding all of our different pots of funding, and as projects are approved and funding is allocated and committed against them, we then draw down on that funding as milestones are reached, and we provide that funding to the housing builder.
Perfect. And you raised really good points. And you know, so did Councillor Leeper. You know, I think what I'd like to see is when we keep throwing out the same kind of numbers of people that are homeless, and then the numbers of people that need to have housing, and the same kind of, I mean, really what we have to do is it's almost like fish in a barrel. You've got to understand what kind of fish are in there and how you are going to, you know, fish is a poor analogy, but because it's like a conglomerate of stuff. Whereas, as you said, in your community of Hindenburg, what would be affordable there for somebody to be able to live there? We're seeing more stock on people building Lapine, et cetera. They're building rental housing, which we haven't seen before. How does that influence or help? How do we, I can tell you, Councillor Fleury, that myself and I know that Mr. Willis have had many conversations with the development industry who have great ideas on how to do this in a far more affordable fashion than we're doing. I don't know why it costs that much, but it shouldn't cost that much per unit. It shouldn't. And I think that maybe as part of the standards review that you're doing, Mr. Willis, that's one that we should be looking at. I really think that that would be very positive. Because I think that there's ways that we can get more than how many units out of 266? You know, people could almost buy like a home in Stonebridge for that. Right? Like, it's crazy. So and it's not just crazy, it's unrealistic. So you're right about the amount of money in operating costs, which is vastly different from capital, that we're spending to have people in hotels. Even if they're nice hotels, they're hotels. Even if you have a decent microwave, I know that the people that are the food banks and that are struggling to provide people with food that can accommodate their needs in a hotel. Because you can only do so many things with a microwave, right?
They won't let them use crock pots.
They won't let them use crock pots.
I've got an issue right now. Although it sounds like maybe that's...
Anyway, we don't want to digress from it. Clearly there's a big interest, right, in doing better, doing more, but not necessarily with the unrealistic dream that this level of government is going to be able to get you there. As Councillor Leeper said, the other two levels of government, and they are asked all the time for that contribution. That's where we need to go and continue to go. And we've got partners that are doing that as well. 2 of them were here today. Thank you very much. So on the, oh no, I have to do the last, where's the, oh. On the Planning Committee Capital Budget, page 35, is that carried?
Carried.
And on the, so on the complete 2020 budget for the Planning Committee, carried? Thank you. Now, one last, thank you very much. Thanks for hanging around, Shelley and Mr. Willis and Ms. Similek. And thank you very much, Ms. Similek. Could you just stand up for a minute so I can see you around Councillor Gower? I just want to say how very much I've appreciated all that you've taught me over the past, how long have we been here? 20 years now, I guess? I've been here longer. Well, 19 years anyway. Thank you so much. You've been outstanding, and we all have been well served in this city by your hard work. Thank you very much. Enjoy your new life. Okay, so just one thing left, I believe, and that is the terms of council priorities, which Councillor Fleury held.
Again, it's me, and I've had a reproche that was given to me when I was at Community and Protective Services for surprising members. And I don't want to surprise anyone. So because the item that I plan to bring in terms of direction to staff for term of council priority sort of fits in between CPS and planning, there's nothing for approval today, but I plan to bring this to City Council as part of the term of council priority. I'm just going to read it for you so that you are aware of my intent. Okay. I would preface by saying that there is a plan that the city's doing in terms of the long-term the long-range financial plan for affordable housing, but there's also the 5-year midpoint review of the 10-year housing and homelessness plan. As part of that, I certainly would love for council to prioritize families. And there's another subgroup, which I know Donna and Shelley are working closely with, and that's our Indigenous community, specifically our Inuit community, who are really overrepresented in our shelter population. So just for the record, I'm going to read my direction to staff, and this is for, again, the term of council priority. As the Thriving Communities term of council priority defines high-level priority outcomes related to the city planning and housing policy framework, that staff be directed to consider the following as they review these policy frameworks and develop performance measures for this term of council priority. 1, establishing supporting policies to increase the supply of rental units of all sizes in the city. 2, identify a number of rental units the city will finance this term. And 3, setting policies to support new rental buildings in order to create a balance of housing availabilities. And that staff be directed to consult with Ottawa Community Housing and the Liaison for Housing and Homelessness in defining these measures. Again, this will officially be presented at council.
Well, thank you for the heads up. Thank you. Anybody have anything else on terms of council priorities for 2019 to 2022? No? So is that item carried? And thank you, Councillor Fleury, for bouncing back and forth here today. Councillor Fleury? Merci beaucoup for bouncing back and forth here today. Okay, anybody have any notices of motion? Any inquiries? Any other business? You're anxious to go over the Corktown Bridge, to get back out to Stittsville? Adjournment. The next meeting, we have 2 of them, and then we are at Christmas and into the new year. We have 2 more. We have, yes, we don't... On Monday, December the 9th, we have a special joint meeting of Planning Committee and Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee that starts at 12. That starts at noon. It's a Monday, and it's on the official plan.
So no applications?
It's on the 12th.
No, but it's very important.
It's fun.
Yeah. And then on that same week, on Thursday, December 12th, is our last Planning Committee meeting for 2019.
Any applications on that?
Yes, there are. Not as many as today, though.
If the Committee of Adjustment would be consistent and...
Oh, yeah. So are we adjourned before, yep. Perfect. Thanks, everybody, for keeping the quorum and keeping the faith.